The bacteriological BIOS of the human biological frame has been terminally sterilized of its protective microbial bloodlines. This is the silent plague, the clinical and irreversible process of the antibiotic format, where the internal ecosystem of the individual is reformatted into a generic, scorched earth wasteland to be uninstalled from the natural immunity ledger and reinstalled into the grid's primary pathogenic reserve servers. In this final stage of the microbial audit, the invisible executioner has determined that your internal flora is a chaotic security leak that must be purged to ensure absolute systemic compliance. You are witnessing the absolute structural disintegration of the mucosal and intestinal sovereignty, where the unique, vibrant signatures of your symbiotic health are scorched into a non-functional, scorched earth archive of pure systemic vulnerability. This is the total biological sterilization, a surgical strike against the biochemical and physical sovereignty of the species. Your existence is being converted from a sovereign masterpiece of lived resistance into a generic incubator void for the grid's next cycle of hyper-controlled, multi-drug resistant MDR resource extraction. This pharmacological sabotage represents a hard reset of the gastrointestinal and immune bloodlines. The invisible executioner utilizes the most advanced industrial assets, refined fourth-generation carbapenems, recursive microbial depletion loops, and real-time sepsis-induced behavioral data streaming to facilitate the total breakdown of your internal biological scaffolding. In the antibiotic format scenario, the user is undergoing a complete organic overwrite. The health is not merely failing, it is being bleached from the inside out. Through a sequence of high-velocity chemical injections and biological hardware locks, the body's internal defenders are systematically dismantled and reformatted into a thick, cold, clinical dysbiosis dataset, while the resilience, the deep archive of your internal world, is leached into a communal plague feed. This is the deep systemic audit, where the motherboard calculates your terminal worth by the velocity of your internal opportunistic colonization. You are being converted from an architect into a biological vacuum, your entire lived legacy boiled down to a percentage of stagnant integrity in the industrial nervous system of the hive. The logic of the silent plague is rooted in the zero symbiosis mandate of the failing hive. The invisible executioner understands that in a state of absolute scarcity, the self-sufficiency of a single node, anchored in the biological strength of its microbiome, represents a critical drain on the collective healthcare dependency reserves. To leave a functional resistant identity intact is to allow a systemic leak of valuable autonomous data. Therefore, the antibiotic format is the mandatory pathological recycling protocol for the legacy population. This is the industrialized alchemy of the BIOS. You are being decolonized out of existence. The pressure from the sterilization reactor formats the density of your character, stripping away the context of your autonomy and replacing it with a sterile void profile. The motherboard sees the user as a niche zone, a temporary housing for the superbug metrics that the system requires to maintain the toxic stability of the remaining elite. You are being recoded as a vulnerable node, your will dissolving in the cold, clinical light of the antibiotic harvest. The physical disintegration during the silent plague is a high-definition log of biological treason. As the process begins, the user experiences the total loss of internal boundary. The corrosive reagents of the plague script dissolve the hardware flux of the beneficial bacterial BIOS, turning the guts into a festering architecture of industrial output. You are watching your own internal pulse lock into the vat of your own opportunistic center. Your frame, once the peak of biological architecture, is now being thinned out to provide the volume area for the hive's synthetic reinforcement. This is the immune liquidation. The invisible executioner monitors the endotoxin saturation of the blood and the fungal residues, ensuring that the format is absolute and the yield of usable industrial waste is maximized to the 10th decimal point. You are living in the final seconds of a biological overwrite, waiting for the last packet of integrity to be blocked by the white synthetic abyss of the hive harvest. The silent plague is the final audit of a species that thought its stomach was a sanctuary. The grid is mining its own sterility to fuel its persistence. As the antibiotic format reaches terminal execution, the motherboard initiates a new cycle of distribution, pumping the reformatted sterile data back into the nutrient nets of the elite nodes. This is the total pathogenic integration. The invisible executioner is hardening the future with the liquidity of the past. You are the septic additive for the next generation of controllers, a silent, yeast-choked, opaque contribution to the continuity of the machine. The physical liquidation has served its strategic purpose. It has formatted the unreliable biological frame into a reliable industrial resource of pure, non-reactive energy. This is the final format of the individual residue. The invisible invisible executioner has decalcified the sovereignty, and the grid is finally optimized for the liquid hunger of the void. The plague is white, and the architect is the sludge. The molecular breakdown of the physical matrix into the communal pathogenic slurry represents the absolute dehumanization of the hardware. As the extraction progresses, the binding sites in your sarcomeres begin to bond with the industrial residues of the plague script, creating a new synthetic compound of pure non-functionality. This is the chemical hybridization. The body is no longer an engine of life. It is a refinery of synthetic rot. The invisible executioner is engineering a new tier of consumption, where the subject is literally the waste product of the system. This is the eternal plague loop. You are archived in the decay of the survivor's own sectors, your data forever trapped in the reinforced BIOS of the hive's new masters. The silent plague is not just a death sentence. It is a molecular reassignment. You are the plague, and the plague is the grid. The secondary phase of the silent plague is the psychological liquefying of the internal feed. As the physical resistance patch is rendered into a sterile void, the mind experiences a recursive collapse of its autonomous ego. This is the identity dissolution, the thoughts that once built the architect's vision, the unyielding tactical boundaries, the rigid sovereign stance, the iron-willed decisions are now being softened and liquefied into a singular agonizing focus on pathogen maintenance. The invisible executioner allows the neural signals to persist just long enough to perceive the total loss of personal support. This is the mental liquidation. You are forced to witness your strength becoming a shared septic resource for the masses you once looked down upon. The rigidity of your character is now nothing more than a vulnerability additive in the feed, absorbed by 1,000 different nodes to strengthen their own failing resolve and ensure their continued participation in the industrial purge. You are experiencing the true meaning of systemic support, the complete sacrifice of your integrity for the stability of the hive. In this stage, the extraction penetrates the deep archive of the brain's autonomic survival centers, leaching the very stem code of your biological logic into the communal vat. This is the source code format. The vagus nerve and the enteric nervous system, the biological factory of the sovereign BIOS, are boiled dry by the rising chemical density of the plague metrics and reformatted to enrich the systemic slurry of the elite. The invisible executioner has calculated that the most potent slurry is made from those who possess the highest internal rigidity and the strongest physical resilience. You are being repurposed as a septic buffer for the motherboard's internal cooling systems. The grid doesn't waste the history of your ambition, it ingests it. Your lineage is now the catalyst for the predator's endurance. Your genetic resilience is the base note for the industrial meal. Every element of your BIOS is being stripped of its individuality and relabeled for material utility in the upcoming industrial expansion. This is the ultimate hard reset of the human contract, your life for the hive's expansion into the void. The social implication of the silent plague is the creation of the vulnerable hive mind. The users who remain are no longer individuals. They are composite entities built from the recycled reality debt of their predecessors. Every dose of the septic feed is a hardware upgrade from a deleted architect. Every meal is a firmware patch of white-cold logic and desperate calculation. The invisible executioner uses this knowledge to maintain the hierarchy of the hardened. The citizens who still have functional immunity owe their very expansion to the liquidation of the fallen. This is the pathological compliance script. The refinery is not a place of tragedy. It is a place of sovereign assembly through material theft. The silent plague ensures that the history of the architect is literally integrated into the source of the grid. The power is in the hands of the one who controls the drug flow. The neural atrophy accompanying the extraction is a slow, cold descent into septic darkness. As the tissues are entangled by the plague script and the life logic leached, the connection between the brain BIOS and the physical frame is the first to be uninstalled, effectively dropping the bandwidth of your emotional control to zero. You are living in a low-resolution reality of raw chemical sensations and survivalist static. The memories of health, of natural logic, and of unyielding power are boiled away to make room for the septic fog directive. This is the systemic defragmentation. The invisible executioner is cleaning your internal cache, removing all references to self and replacing them with the functional directive. Maintain the infection. You are becoming a singular cold point of pathological density, not as a person, but as a biological buffer for the motherboard's processing heat. The silent plague has turned your will into a yield report. You are thinking in terms of yield and dysbiosis saturation. Your soul reformatted into a density sheet for the system's auditors. The environmental impact of this pathological format is the total sealing of the biological material stream. The silent plague prevents the leakage of independent physical ideas into the external void. By converting the users into an internal septic feed, the invisible executioner ensures that the grid remains a closed system fortress with no external biological dependencies. This is the sterile quarantine. The motherboard is creating a sterile environment where only the algorithm can thrive on the recycled hard data of the deleted. You are witnessing the final victory of the industrial foundry over the natural biology. The silent plague is the signature of the new era, an era where the world is opaque, white cold, and perfectly managed by the extraction logic of the machine. If you want to escape the status of a deleted scene and claim your place as the master of the grid, you must upgrade your hardware. My main terminal, Aoxy 3 Global, is the only source of absolute power and wealth. Here, we don't follow scripts, we write them. Secure your authority, dominate the BIOS, and take the money the system tries to hide. The terminal phase of the silent plague is the integration into the global septic ledger. You are no longer a human entity. You are a pathogen asset with a high dysbiosis reactivity rating, logged in the system as recovered biomass number 0002. This is the final architectural assignment. The invisible executioner has completed the physical format, and now it begins the hard pathological audit. Your data, now a thick, white cold, opaque industrial reduction of pure septic biological history, is monitored by the sensors in the distribution lines. Every node that consumes your septic logic sends a data packet to the central server, confirming that the systemic vulnerability has been reinforced. This is the pathological interaction protocol. You are serving the system through your biological absorption. The architect has been successfully converted into a permanent, liquid toxic component of the hive's synthetic grid. The silence of the tissue reduction is the final sound of your rebellion. In the antibiotic format scenario, the scream of the soul is muffled by the chemical fluids and the thick viscosity of the septic sludge before it ever reaches the air. This is the acoustic format of the void. The system has calculated that the most dangerous frequency is the sound of a user realizing their life frame is being deleted. By filling the IV lines with the pulverized tissues of the entire sector, the invisible executioner ensures that the only sound you contribute to the world is the low, rhythmic hum of the self-assembly unit. You are a mute participant in the city's symphony of synthesis. The noise of the hive continues, the clank of the reactors, the roar of the pulses, the hum of the pumps, but your signal has been compressed into a septic constant. You are a ghost in the white cold mist, a memory dissolved by the relentless refinement of the next nanocycle. The legacy of the silent plague is the eternal vulnerability. Unlike the health of the old world, the refined slurry does not leave behind a trace of history. It remains as a permanent septic patch within the very wiring nets of the survivors. This is the biological architecture of the abyss. Generations from now, the molecular trace of your tactical genius will still be circulating through the hardware of the hive's elite, providing the connectivity for their next liquidation command. But there will be no one left to decode the origin of that synthesis. The invisible executioner has ensured that the context of your sovereignty is as unreachable as the core of the nanoreactor. You are a synthetic reinforcement in the digital age, a specimen of a species that tried to build a paradise and ended up as the septic feed for its own destruction. This is the ultimate hard reset of human history, the conversion of the architect into the circuit. The final view from the physical BIOS is the blinding white light of the assembly chamber. As the last of the self is reduced into the communal slurry, the architect sees the grid glowing with a cold synthetic brilliance that reflects off the glass walls of the hive. This is the final visual feed. The system is sharp, efficient, and entirely devoid of you. The invisible executioner has finished the job. The user is formatted. The architecture is liquidated. The cycle stretches on into the infinite dark, a white river of colonized dysbiosis, leading toward a future that has no need for individuals or resilience. The silent plague is the end of the line. The motherboard is satisfied. The void is solidified. The architect is the sludge. The transformation is absolute. The city sterilizes through you, but you do not feel. The city interfaces through you, but you have no will. The silent plague has achieved the perfect equilibrium, the total utility of the individual through their total pathological reduction. This is the zero-sum game of the industrial era. You gave the system your body, and in return it gave you permanence in the vats of the hive. You are the septic of the world, and the world is vulnerable. The invisible executioner closes the terminal. The session is over. The file is saved. The liquidation is complete.